Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Dan and Kingdom Way, for this wonderful opportunity. And what a joy to be sharing with you in this new space for the WorkLife Connect. The very first time we're all here. This is an inaugural event, so give yourself a round of applause for being part of that. I also want to just thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here. I know there's lots of places you can be, but I hope that being here today is exactly where you're supposed to be. And what I want to do is, before we begin and start talking about the topic of the day, I want to invite the Lord to be present, to be here, to join us in this wonderful new space. So join me in a word of prayer. Father God, I just thank you so very much for this beautiful day that you've given us, for this beautiful space, for this opportunity for all of us to connect and to really feel your presence and your grace. I just ask that you fill us up with your spirit, fill us up with your purpose, and allow us to feel that sense of presence throughout our day and throughout our week and throughout the weeks ahead. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so first and foremost, my title to this presentation is Learning to Lead and Leading to Learn. And this is an important lesson for every leader. And this is not just something that is for me, although I'm going to share with you that everything I'm sharing today is from my life experience. So first of all, a couple fess-ups. I am almost 55 years old. Woo! Almost 55 years old. Well, that allows me to say that I have had almost 45 years of leadership experience. Now, do the math. You're probably going to go, 45 years? She must have only been 9 or 10 years old? Yes, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But every single one of you in this room is also a leader. And so these lessons are lessons that I'm going to draw through different phases of my life, and it might resonate to different phases of your lives. And in fact, this entire presentation is also going to resonate with some biblical principles that we're going to see from the life of David. And so we're going to integrate all of that, a little bit of me, a little bit of you, and a little bit of what the scripture has to say about leadership. Now, before we start getting into these lessons that I'm going to cover with you, I want to tell you a story. So, I was a good student, a really good student. I was a smart kid. And I did well in grade school, in middle school, in high school, and I started to hone certain kinds of skills. But I was also a very active student. I did all kinds of things. I was president of this and president of that and captain of this and captain of that. And I was a busy bee in school. So much so that eventually I started to spend less and less of my time in the classroom and more of my time everywhere else. In fact, in my senior year of high school, I had so many meetings through the lunch hour that it was very difficult for me to get to any classes after the lunch hour. But there was one class that I had immediately after the lunch hour that I almost never got to, and that class was called physics. How many of you are physics buffs in the room? Oh, look at that, one, okay. So I want to tell you, to the one person, but everyone else too, I actually liked physics. I found it fascinating. I loved the teacher, he loved me, I was a great student in that class. I was even in the physics club, which makes me the biggest nerd in the room right now, right? But I want to tell you, I never went to that class. So think about that. How does someone become a really good student in physics when you're never in class? Well, I'll tell you. Anytime there was a quiz or a test of any kind, I would come into the classroom a little bit early. I would open up my textbook. I would flip through the pages, and then I'd shut the test book, set it down, and then the test would come. And I had a little image of every single thing I saw in that book, and I took my test. And guess what? In high school, everything in the test is just straight out of your textbook. What I didn't have a label for then, I'll give you a label for now. I had what's called a photographic memory, right? Click, click, click. I literally was taking pictures of everything that I saw there, and I could regurgitate that. But I'm going to ask you a tough question. Did I learn physics? Everybody's shaking their head. Thank you for that affirmation. I did not learn physics. I learned how to achieve an A in physics, and I got an A in physics. I sometimes got A pluses in physics, but I never learned physics. In fact, if any one of you came up to me and asked me anything about physics, I couldn't answer. Not a thing. Except maybe the guy in the back could help me with that. My point is this: leadership is a lot like this. A lot of us as leaders have skills and abilities, and what we're really good at is achieving. We're really good at meeting our goals. We're really good at doing things that make us look like we're doing really well. But the question is, are we learning? Are we taking any lessons away from our leadership? Are we applying those lessons for our continued leadership? And if we're not learning, then I'm going to say this to you all, because I'm saying it to myself, then you're not really leading. In the same way that you might get all the A's in the world in physics if you're somebody like me, and maybe not have any knowledge of physics. So there's a sobering thought, huh? Now with that, let me get us started. There are two quotes, and you're going to see lots of quotes in my presentation because I get a lot of inspiration from lots of people. And so I want to share a little bit of that with you. The first is, whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Anybody know who said that? It's from Philippians, but anybody know who said that? Right, that's the Apostle Paul. So the Apostle Paul was learning from the life of Christ. And then everything he learned, he was teaching to the people around him, in this case, the Philippians. And this is what he shared with us. So what I want you to know is in front of you, there is a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, you're going to see this blank spot for all these lessons of today that we're going to share. And then you're going to see something called personal application. And I want to encourage everyone, and remember, I was a professor, so I'm going to hold you to this. I want to hold everyone to account for making a point of putting down a personal application, because that's what he says. He says, learn it, receive it, and practice it. Okay, so this is your chance to do that. The other quote is from someone that we all know, John F. Kennedy, one of our former presidents, and he said, leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. So that's the point that we started with. You must be a learner if you're a leader, and vice versa, right? So one of the things I want to share with you is some of the greatest leaders of all time were people that really knew this concept. All of you know who George Washington is, right? Our first president. Do you know that our first president was not even elected? Our first president was given that role. And why was he given that role? Because he became so indispensable in his work. He learned so much, he applied so much that he became indispensable. He's known as the indispensable man. And so every leadership role he had was because he was able to apply what he learned. So let's go to our first lesson. Lesson number 1, hopefully you can see it up there. Be responsible and trustworthy. So remember I said to you earlier that I'm 55 almost, and I've had more than 45 years of experience. Well, it's because of my first job. I want everyone in the room, you can just show hands. Does anyone remember your very first job? Yeah? So somebody throw out something for me. What was your very first job?
I worked in Nebraska walking cornfields.
Nebraska walking cornfields, that's a good one. Others, any other first jobs? Maid, okay. Throw one out, another one out. How about back there? What's that?
Tennis teacher.
Tennis teacher, that's a fun one. Anything else? Babysitting. Okay, ding, 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 ding. I'm going to stop there. My first job, real job, paying job, was as a babysitter. And I was 9 years old. And I had younger siblings. I had a younger brother, younger sister, so I was already taking care of them because we were an immigrant family. And we started kind of at the bottom rung and had to work our way up. My mother worked nights, and so she wasn't always readily available to help us with all the day-to-day. So I did a lot with my brother and sister. But the neighbors around us took note, and what they did was they started seeing that I was pretty good at taking care of kids. So I started babysitting. But let me tell you, I wasn't your everyday babysitter. Oh no, I had a client list. I had babysitting jobs every night after school. I had weekends. I babysat all summer, all day long, and then I'd have a quick dinner and go babysit again. I probably violated various child labor laws, but the reality is I was in business. But of course, at that time of my life, this was not an era where you made a whole lot of bucks out of babysitting. In fact, I thought it was really cool if I got $0.25 an hour for babysitting. And why people would give me just $0.25 to take care of their children, I don't know, but there you go. But the point is, I started my leadership journey babysitting. because in babysitting, I was able to learn to be responsible and dependable and trustworthy. And that is the beginning of everybody's leadership journey. It does not matter what your first job is. It does not matter who you are, what age you are. The very first thing that you are as a leader is you have to be trustworthy. And that was the beginning of my journey. Now, being trustworthy means that you're also being consistent. And you'll notice that I've got that underline just to underscore. But you're not just demonstrating that you're responsible, but you're also consistently being a person of integrity and a person of trustworthiness, right? You don't just be trustworthy once. That's not what makes trustworthiness. It's that consistent pattern in your life. And then finally, you recognize that when you utilize these traits of trustworthiness and dependability, you're actually developing yourself as a leader. You increase your capacities. You increase your abilities to have various opportunities. There's a wonderful quote here that I'm going to share. Stephen Covey, probably many of you know, he's kind of a leadership guru. And he said, "Trust is the glue of life. It's the foundational principle that holds all relationships." And I want you all to know as leaders, and especially if you're a business leader, but for every form of leader, it all starts with a relationship. And no one is going to have a relationship with someone they can't trust, right? Who would want to do that? I want to sort of demonstrate that also from a biblical perspective. This is a little bit my life, right? I was the babysitter. But I also want to look at the life of David. David's leadership journey, and David is known to be one of the greatest leaders in history, one of the greatest leaders in the Bible. But David's journey of leadership started as a shepherd boy. He was not king. That's not where his story started. As a shepherd boy, he demonstrated trustworthiness, accountability by taking care of the flock. He even put himself out there to fight bears and lions on behalf of his sheep at a very young age, as a child. And that's where his leadership began. So take a moment to just jot down this leadership lesson and jot down a personal application. All right. And we're going to be moving fast, so you'll be writing fast. I'll keep us moving along. All right, so that brings us to lesson number 2, serving others. Now, we're probably mostly Christians in this room. Maybe all of us are Christians in this room. And so we often say things like, we are servant leaders. You guys have heard that phrase? We're servant leaders. What I want to tell you is, as someone who works mostly in the secular community, but deeply rooted in my biblical principles, the term servant leadership is not a common thing in other circles. It sounds kind of odd. But we want to embrace the fact that a leader is a servant first. And the reason a leader is servant first is because that's how Jesus came into the world for us, right, as a servant. But I want to share a little bit about my journey. And I found that, beyond the babysitting, that a lot of my opportunities to lead, whether it was student government or community organizations or even my cross-country and track teams, a lot of it had to do with service. Just because I had a title didn't mean I didn't serve. In fact, it actually meant that I served more. Because when you're captain of a team, what you have to do is take care of the team. You have to prep things, you got to help get things together. And that was the same thing with every other role that I had. So every leadership role for me was about serving people. But what I also found is that every time I was willing to serve and support others, I got a new opportunity myself. I learned that by serving others, I'm building my own abilities and capacities for leadership. I also learned that when I'm developing those skills, I get to even have more opportunities and experiences through more service. So it's sort of like this never-ending cycle with service. The more you serve, the more you get. The more you serve, the more you get. And eventually I figured out that, wow, service was really more for me than it was even for the people that I'm serving, right? So think about that. How many have ever been to a mission trip? Anybody? Hands raised? Let's just throw out. Where did you go?
Ukraine.
Ukraine, fantastic. Anyone else? Yes.
Next to come with 3 busloads of teenagers.
Oh, wow. Bless you. Bless you, bless you. Others? Yes.
Cambodia.
Cambodia. I mean, incredible. You guys have gone to incredible places. And I don't want to in any way slight you on these incredible places you've gone. Because every time we do a mission trip, we are bringing the gospel with us. We're bringing our hearts, we're bringing our hands and feet. We're doing incredible things when we're in the service of others, right? But I'm going to guarantee that if I went around to every person in the room and asked you, did you give more to the people you served on your mission trip, or did you get more from the experience? I think I'd know what your answer would be, right? Service is something that benefits others, but ultimately benefits you. I want to read this from Mahatma Gandhi. I'm from India originally, so of course I've got to reference Gandhi along the line. But he said, the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Isn't that remarkable? The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Now, I also want to reference back to David. So we talked about David as shepherd, but David also was a servant. When he was anointed by the Lord, the very first thing that happened to him wasn't a crown on his head. It wasn't this opportunity to be this sort of big deal. It was to be a servant. He served Saul. He served alongside his great friend Jonathan. He served with the military people that he ended up serving alongside with for wars, right? So he was a servant first, and he was willing to serve. And he did that, and eventually all of that service ended up equipping him for being the king, which is pretty remarkable. All right, so take a moment and jot down your next lesson and your next practical application. All right, you ready for lesson number 3? This one's a fun one. Okay, this is one that you make everyone feel good, correct? No, because look at the title. Lesson number 3 is fall, but fall forward. So I want to start by this note. Every single leader, every single person is going to eventually, inevitably, fall or fail, right? That's a given in life. We are sinners. We are fallible, and we are going to fall and fail. But the mark of a real leader is knowing how to fall or fail forward. So I want to tell you another story. So I mentioned sort of my experience in the early days, as a student, and then I went on to college. And what I want to tell you is, because I was a strong student, when I graduated from high school, I not only graduated as the top of my class, I was the top student in Minnesota, my home state. And the governor gave me this big award, and I got to go off to Washington, D.C. It was all kind of very heady. At graduation time, I led the group in. I did the graduation speech. I had this flag that I carried. It was quite grand. Then I got the wonderful opportunity to go to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And I was in the School of Foreign Service. And that School of Foreign Service at that time was not only the #1 foreign service school in the United States, it was the #1 foreign service school in the world. So pretty amazing, right? I felt very proud, honored, and I felt equipped to be there. But very quickly, over the 4 years of my college life, while I loved my time at Georgetown, made great friends, had great experiences, things didn't quite go the same as in high school, okay? I ended up having to deal with health issues. I ended up having to struggle with certain classes because things like economics and international trade and international finance didn't quite work like my physics class. It didn't quite work like that. And so I had to work really hard, and I was in sports, I was in all the activities, I did all the things, and I was stretched thin. I graduated, and I did pretty well, but not anything like that grand moment when I graduated from high school. In fact, to add sort of injury to insult, I broke my leg right before graduation. So when graduation came, not only did I not feel like I had achieved the way I achieved before, but I had to come along the graduation line at the end with my crutches. Okay, pretty humbling. But I have a question for you. Which of those two experiences did I learn more from? Was it the grand entrance at the high school graduation, or was it the other? And I'm going to tell you it was the other, because that moment humbled me, it reset me, and it made me realize something. Tomorrow is another day. And that's exactly what happened. My family was there. We drove away with my vehicle filled with stuff to start my whole life. And the next day was another day. It was the beginning of the rest of my life. I didn't have to dwell on that moment that wasn't so great. I had to set that aside, take the lessons, take the lumps if I needed to, and move forward. That is what leadership is all about. And what I want to tell you is leadership is about falling and failing because you learn more from those experiences. If you're a younger leader in the room, this is what I'm going to tell you. You are just as smart and just as capable as any other leader at any age, okay? But there's one difference. Most of the time, the people who are older than you have had more opportunities to fall and fail. And so as a result, they might have more experiences and more lessons that they can apply, and that's why you have to listen to them, because you don't want to have to repeat those same fallings and failings to get to your lessons, right? I also want to mention that there's this great sort of perspective that you get. When you're someone who falls and fails, you also get perspective. You start to have compassion on other people who maybe have gone through similar things. You have a chance to sort of wonder, is there a better way? And those are all great qualities for a leader. Here's a great leader and a quote to share. Success is not final, failure is not fatal, and it is courage to continue that counts. Keep that in mind. I'm going to read it again. Success is not final, failure is not fatal, and it is courage that continues to count. Now, this is interesting that came from Winston Churchill. I'm going to make one correction in his statement. He led during what? World War II. And there were all kinds of fallings and failures during World War II, and actually they were fatal. There was great loss in that context. And so remember that same person who experienced some of the heaviest weight of loss also made that statement of hope, right? Now I want to refer back to David. So all of you know from reading the Bible that David was a remarkable leader, but we also know the stories of his great failings. He actually, as a king, was an adulterer, a liar, a murderer, right? So this is failing big. I don't think anybody in this room, and I don't want to assume much, but I don't think anybody in the room is necessarily those things, right? But the point is, if someone could fail that big and still be regarded as a man after God's heart, that's pretty remarkable. So that gives you some perspective on how God views our failings and failures, our fallings and failures. He is not worried about your mistakes. What he wants is your redemption. So why David continued to be who he became is because he recognized his falling and his failures. He owned it. He asked for forgiveness. He cried. He pled, and he moved forward. And now historically, he's known as one of the greats. Pretty remarkable. Take a moment and write down your lesson and your personal application. All right, lesson number 4. This is so much more fun than the last one. We're not talking about fallings and failings. We're going to do risks, but you might fall on those risks too. But let me start by saying, when I was in college, I had a friend who I was going to a dance with. And I was late to the dance, and everyone said, "Hey, Brad, where's your date?" And he said, "Oh, she's skydiving." And everybody laughed at him and said, "Oh, ha, ha, ha," and they moved on. And then I finally arrived to the dance, and they said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "Well, I've been skydiving." And I literally was skydiving, and it was a thrill. It was amazing, and it was just a tremendous experience. Many years later, after I married my husband, who is a risk taker, who is kind of the extreme sport guy, jumps off of every mountain, does all these crazy things, is a pilot, did all these wild rides, we went on our honeymoon, and I am a terrible swimmer. Okay, I don't swim very well. And we were in Costa Rica with all these people, and there's this beautiful big pool, and everybody was jumping off a 40-foot cliff. I'm not a good swimmer. And my husband jumped out and he joined the crew. And then I said, well, he just did this. I need to do this too. And so I put on my little life vest and I decided to jump off that cliff. And my husband was like, I'm going to lose my wife on our honeymoon. This is not working and this is not good. But I did it and it was fun. All of this is great stuff to say, oh, risk-taking. But that's not the risk-taking that I'm referring to here for leadership. It's not about jumping out of airplanes, jumping off cliffs. If you do that, great. I hope you had as much fun as I did. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is new experiences and opportunities. Leaders can't just do the same thing over and over and over again. Leaders have to be at the front of new endeavors, new opportunities, in any context that you're in. Some of you are working in sales, some of you in real estate, some of you might be in restaurants, some of you might be in nonprofits. No matter what your field or arena, you have to constantly be looking to new things. That's what it means to be a learner, right? You have to constantly be thinking about what else can I learn and what else can I try? And that word try is what we're talking about here. Because risk doesn't always mean that things are going to work out. But risk means you are willing to try, to take that risk. And so it's important for us to be willing to take what we call positive risks. Because just being crazy is not what we're talking about here. It's really about thinking through, applying the lessons that you have learned in your leadership, and then moving you forward to be stretched. This is seeking new experiences to grow. It might be growing your business, but it might be just growing you. And sometimes it's growing the people around you. In addition, we want you to really face fear. Fear. Many of you might know this, but the Bible literally has 365 references to do not fear. Don't you think that's interesting? When we have 365 days of the year, God is hitting home with us that He is there to give you that message of do not fear every day of the year. Do not fear. And fear is the thing that really robs us of adventure. Whenever we're fearful, we're going to prevent ourselves from seeking new opportunities, from trying. So don't let fear prevent you from these leadership possibilities and learning. I want to read this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face. You must do the thing you think you cannot do. Now, everybody in this room is in a different place and space in life. Some of you are experiencing some significant challenges. Maybe it's a health issue, maybe it's a business issue, maybe it's something with family, maybe it's something in our community. But this is what you need to think about. We need to look at fear in the face and do the thing that we think we cannot do. That is how a leader is able to move and press forward into new opportunities and new adventures. Let's take a moment and just do your lesson and also your practical experience. And I'll come back to David as Giant Slayer in a moment. So on this slide, I referenced David as Giant Slayer. We talked about David as a shepherd, as a servant. We've talked about David as king and his failings, but I want to talk about David, the Giant Slayer. Facing giants is a very difficult thing, and giants don't have to be the 9-foot-tall Goliath that we read in the Bible. Sometimes a giant could be really small. But every single one of you, and you don't need to raise your hands on this, we all have a giant that we have to slay. It could be our lack of confidence. It could be something that happened to us. It could be something that we're facing. It could be anything, but everybody has a giant to slay. But I want to give us some perspective. Slaying giants might feel overwhelming to us. We might not feel big enough, strong enough, capable enough. But the thing is, David was just a child. He was not big enough, strong enough, or capable enough. So how in the world did he slay Goliath? Well, because he thought about these other experiences he had as the shepherd, as the servant. And he said, I did this and this in my background. I can do this. I slayed the bear. I slayed the lion. This guy's nothing. And I want you all to know that all the giants that we face in the room, we have the same opportunity to stand in front of that giant and say, I've done these other things in my life, and I can do this one too. So I encourage you to take heart and strength in that. So next lesson. This is one of my favorites, build a team. I have some team members here today, so I'm going to have them wave, but I've got Christine Trevor here, I've got Sarah Wiley here, got my husband Zach, and Alicia Martinez, Brenda Brunbeck, and several other friends that are in the room. What I want you to know is building a team is so important. My good friend Georgia, who is for the Village Care Project, she does a lot of work in Africa, so she'll appreciate this. But there's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And so this is what building a team is all about. When you're building a team, it's not always easy to do, right? But really, as a leader, if you don't have anybody behind you following, or you don't have anyone alongside you serving, then you're not a leader at all. Because by definition, you need those folks. And in fact, a team requires that you are building relationships with each and every person in that team. And that is how the leader also develops. Ultimately, a team is what demonstrates your leadership impact, right? So each of you are leading different kinds of teams. And you don't have to be the CEO, by the way, to be the leader of a team. You can lead teams in many different ways. But the point is, who's your team? For some of you, it could be the family that you have around you. For some of you, it could be the staff. It could be some community group. Many of you might have different types of teams. But I want you to recognize your team and build into that team and allow them to build into you. There's a great quote here that you may not recognize this person. I don't even know if I can pronounce his name. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, right? Anybody know who that is? I didn't either till I discovered this quote that I love so much. He was actually an aviator, and my husband is a pilot, so he'll appreciate this, but early aviator. And he applied this statement that I thought was so fitting for leadership. So let me read it to you. If you want to build a ship, don't drum up the men to gather wood, divide the work, and give orders. And I'll add, or women. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. Don't you love that? So the point is, building a team is not about tasks. Yes, we have tasks. Yes, there are things we must accomplish. You can't have an effective team and just sit there, right? We got to do stuff. But the point is, it's not the doing stuff that it's all about. It's about the bigger picture. If any of you are sailors, and I grew up on lakes in Lake Minnetonka, Minnesota, so I really appreciate this, but if you are someone who yearns for the vast and endless sea, what does that motivate you to do? To build a ship, right? If you want to go out into the sea, you are going to build that ship. So instead of telling people, build a ship, get them excited about going out to sea. That's what it's about to be a leader. And I want to demonstrate that in my own life, we have this terrific team, and I've had other team members. But what I want my team to know is that at the end of the day, as much as they work hard and all these things that we do at Global, which you'll hear a little bit about later, that's wonderful. But what's more wonderful is, are we committed to each other? Are we committed to justice? How we get there is not as significant to me, right? But I also want to share a little bit about David. So David, as you know, became a really grand military leader. He was having a command over vast armies, over vast areas, lots of people under his command. But did you know he had about 37 warriors that were just fighting around him? That was his team. So he might have led all these other people in all these ways, but those 37 people were his team. And they fought valiantly, and they fought together, and they understood the same broader purpose that he was trying to accomplish. And that's the team that he spoke into, and those are the people who spoke into his life, protected him, moved him forward into the roles that he played. So let's take a moment and jot down your lesson and your practical application. All right, we're coming down the home stretch here. Lesson 6. So up to this point, I've been sharing a lot about just kind of the early years, in my college years and all of that other type of thing. But what I want you to know is when I got to different stages of my life, I had different kinds of opportunities. And when I was in my 20s after school, I took about 3 years between undergrad and law school to have different experiences, have those adventures that I mentioned to you. So I was working in Washington, D.C. for a year. I worked in San Francisco for a year. I went back to Minneapolis, St. Paul for a year. And I got to do all kinds of amazing things. In fact, I even got to help put together this big event for the President of the United States, which at that time was Bill Clinton. And to be eye to eye as a 24-year-old with the President of the United States, that was a big deal, right? Later on, after law school, I went and got a fellowship. And that fellowship allowed me to travel to Geneva, Switzerland, and work with this incredible man that was the UN subcommission member on human rights. And human rights became my passion. And I really, really loved the experiences I had there. Very hard, but really amazing experiences. And I can go on and to list all these things. But at the end of the day, what I want you to know is whatever experiences that you have in your life, the opportunities that you have, the leadership potentials, everything, at the end of the day, it's not even about those roles and experiences and everything else. It's really about purpose, right? And my life has never been a straight line. And yes, I've had lots of opportunities and wonderful experiences, but everything was about somehow coming back to an ultimate purpose, a purpose that God had on my life. And I want to tell you that every leader in this room is in that same place. You have a purpose and you have a calling. Purpose, by the way, is who you are and why you do what you do. Purpose is who you are and why you do what you do. And if in this moment, and again, you don't have to raise your hand, you have not had yet clarity on what that is, I ask you to take some time to learn that. That might be your first leadership lesson for the day, is just to take the time to get your why. Who are you and why? And then calling follows that. So when you have a calling, you're then going to know what you're going to do in response to your purpose. Who you are, why you are being called, then you do your what. And some of the mistakes of leaders is they start with the what. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. But you got to start with the who and the why. That's really important. Pursuing your purpose and calling, by the way, is not easy. It takes a lot of sacrifice. So currently, my purpose is invested in something called global justice. But I want to share a story of something before that. When I was in California, my husband and I lived there for about 12 years. My husband was in the military, he was an Air Force officer, and he was based out of Mississippi for quite a while. We were together as a married couple there for 1 year, and then he wanted to get out of Mississippi. He's from California, he wanted to get back to California. We get to California, he goes to his training for the U-2 program, which is a remarkable program with these high altitude airplanes. And the day after he finished his training, 9/11 happened. And I will never forget that moment, and I'll share that story in full in another context, but what I want to tell you is that day, I will never forget. It stood out, frozen in time. And I remember my husband standing in his flight suit, staring at the television set as the second airplane crashed into the Twin Towers. And I stood watching kind of over him from a balcony area, and we froze. And then when we froze, all of a sudden he turned and he looked up at me and said, "I don't think I'm going to be home tonight." It was incredible. It was an incredible moment. And he left, and I literally didn't know if I would ever see him again. He went off to base. I did see him again. He was gone for about 24 hours. And then after that, he went overseas and stayed overseas for about 288 days out of that year. He did all kinds of things that we could never know about. There was shock and awe and all of those things we saw on the television set. And I had no idea where my husband was because he had a classified kind of a role, and it was a clandestine type of thing that he did. And so I never knew where he was and when I'd see him again. At one point, he was gone for 5 months at a time. And in that 5-month period, we had no phone call, no email, no nothing. That was pretty dramatic, right? During that time, I was running a large criminal defense association, and then I was working a lot, and he was gone a lot. And then there came a moment where I just said, "Okay, Lord, I need to get a grip on who I am, why I am, and what I'm going to do. And I had to lay down everything I was doing and just say, Lord, I've been working for this whole world. I want to work for you. And maybe in this context, he'll also give me a little baby. Because at that point, we had been married for 5 years, but we hardly got to be together even, and we hadn't started a family. God kept a wonderful promise to me and said, okay, you work for me, and I'll give you that baby. And he did. He gave us our first child, and later on gave us twin girls, so I got doubly blessed again. But I want to tell you this story because in that moment, that 9/11 experience was the time in my life I had to face this idea of purpose and calling. What was I doing with my life, and how does it matter? And I'll tell you that what I was forced to reckon with was, now I'm pregnant, and I'm thinking to myself, do I want this child to enter a world where you have a thing like 9/11 happen? And what can I do to make sure that he doesn't have to experience that again, right? That became the moment where I started doing something very different with my life. I became an educator. I was a professor at a university. I never imagined being an academic. I'm an advocate. I'm a human rights person. But I realized that my whole life and all these experiences were things I needed to share with others, to equip others, to equip the next generation so that we would never have to face another 9/11. Now, the reality is we may face 9/11 or something like that, right? But I can do something. I can help others. And that was what strove me forward to where we are today. Ralph Waldo Emerson is not a leader as you might know it, didn't hold office or wasn't a business person, but he was a great literary giant, and he was a thoughtful man. And he said the purpose of life is not to be happy. I'm going to come back to that. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, and to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. 9/11 for me was one of those moments where I had to wrestle with this. Happiness is something that our world is constantly selling us, right? Think about all the things we see on social media and on and on and on. You'll be happy if you do this, if you buy this, if you go here, if you do that. It's not about happiness. I'm sorry to say that. You can be happy, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not about happiness. It's not about how happy you can be. It's about what kind of difference you can make with the life that you lead. And every leader needs to recognize that that's what it's about. Amen. I'm going to have you take a moment and write down a note, and I'll come back to God as David as God's instrument. Okay, so I know we're a little over time, Dan, so we'll get through this pretty quickly. So in the last slide, the last thing you saw on the screen was David as God's instrument. And that is a lead-in to this slide. So David had all these roles, right? He had all these roles as servant and king and all those things. But ultimately, what his real role was God's instrument. And when we're talking about purpose and calling, we're really talking about how to become God's instrument, because that purpose and calling comes from him. And David achieved that purpose and calling by his prayer life, by his relationship with God. And so I want to make sure that we're all remembering that when we're struggling with lessons and learning and all these things, that we're starting with prayer and seeking out what God has in store for our life, for our purpose. And that helps us set us up for this next piece and the last lesson I'll share with you today. Lesson number 7 is consider your legacy. Now that's a big word, legacy. Sounds very heavy, right? Sometimes people think about that as something they'd share at a funeral, his legacy that they left. But I want to tell you, no matter what age you are in the room, and no matter what status you have with your businesses and organizations, this is the time, today is the day to start thinking about your legacy, okay? Learn from yesterday, live for today, and look to the future. That's sort of a mantra that I have personally, okay? Learn from yesterday, live for today, and look to the future. And this is the thing. We do not want to live in the past. The past is history that gives us lessons that we apply today. We can't go backwards. That's not possible. But we can apply what we've learned today. We also can't know the future. We can't even live for the future. because we don't know when the future will come. I want to share with you, and I won't go into details, but just recently I had a dear person that I've known for a long time, and her 55-year-old mother, who was in good health, overcame breast cancer. All of a sudden, without any expectation, got a second round of breast cancer that was ferocious. And within 2 weeks, she was in hospice and passed away. Nobody would have imagined that to have happened when they just saw her as a healthy person. So the point is, we can't live for the future because we have no idea when our days are numbered, right? What we can do, though, is look to the future, because no matter how long we have to do our work, to be who we are, we can actually build into the future. So in other words, you can't predict the future, but you can shape it. And I want every leader in the room to know that you are shaping it right now. Consider not just where you will be in 5 or 10 years, but consider what it means in a lifetime. What is your legacy? What are you going to leave? If tomorrow was the last day you're here, what will people say about your legacy that you've had thus far? I want to also add that my other mantra is to pray, dream, and inspire, and then hit repeat. Every day, pray, dream, inspire, and hit repeat. This is ultimately what I believe leadership is all about. You praying into whatever God's purpose is, you dreaming what God is going to do with that, and ultimately you inspiring other people. And this little quote is one that I also love, and I want to mention. Adam Grant is another sort of leadership guru, and he said, good leaders build products. Great leaders build cultures. Good leaders deliver results. Great leaders develop people. Good leaders have vision. Great leaders have values. Good leaders are role models at work. Great leaders are role models in life. So as you are doing your work, as you are building your businesses, as you're doing all the good things that you do, think about how to make your good things great. Consider that legacy. And I'll leave that with David. So as you know, David played all these roles. But did you know that David would have loved to have the role of building the temple? Did David build the temple? No, because God's purposes for him was a little bit different. But David, even though he didn't achieve the temple, left a remarkable legacy of leading his people, because that was the call in his life. And so just know that even if you're not achieving the great things that you want your legacy to be, your legacy can still be quite significant because God's already laid out what you're going to accomplish through that. So I know time is up, and I wanted to give everybody a little time to talk with your tables. We might not be able to do that today, but I did want to let you know just a couple final notes. If you have the opportunity, I encourage you to come visit us at Global Justice. This is a little bit about who we are, and our website gives you a lot more information. We have lots of great contact on social media, website, etc., so come on out. We also have this great global market, and we brought a little sample of that for you to enjoy and learn more about different organizations that we support, including Georgia's Village Care Project. So last slide for you is this one. As we sum up our whole time together, I think this quote might capture all of it. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. The greatest leader we've ever had was Jesus Christ. And when Jesus Christ led, he had no title, he had no status, he had no possessions, he didn't even have a home. But he led by applying the lessons that he learned from his Father. And he built a team of 12 or more people, and he gave them such inspiration from his own life that when he left our world, those people were so inspired that they did even more than he did, spreading the gospel, and even allowed themselves to be sacrificed in his example. When we think about leadership, we don't have to be Jesus. We can't be Jesus. But can we learn from his leadership example? And can we apply it to all those in our family, in our workplace, and in our community? That is how we become leaders. Thank you. God bless you.